Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Richard Fain, the former CEO of the Royal Caribbean Group and chair of the board. He also has a new book coming out in October, and that is called Delivering the Wow: Culture as Catalyst for Lasting Success. And fun fact, I spoke at Richard's leadership retreat. We were just talking about this before I hit record around a decade ago. So we haven't seen each other in around 10 years. Richard, it's good to see you again.
Well, thank you, Jacob. Thank you for having me. And by the way, again, thank you for helping us back then. Preparing our leaders for the future is a key part of what's made Royal Caribbean successful. And thank you for your help in that process.
Yeah, it was fun. I remember we took a selfie together next to one of the Royal Caribbean signs. So I was doing a little bit of snooping about you. Is it true that you've been with the company since 1979?
It is, yes.
So
Um,
longer than
but
I have been alive, you have been working at the company.
Thank you for reminding me of my age. But I would point out that at that point, I was simply an outside director looking in. So it's only since 1988 that I've actually been full time working with the company.
For people not familiar with the brand, just in terms of how many employees you have, the scale of the ships, give us a little bit of background information just about the company and just the scale, the impact that you guys have.
Okay, well, I'm happy to talk about it. We are a $16 billion per year revenue company. We have 68 ships. We carry about 12 million guests a year,
Wow.
and we have a little over 100,000 employees. One of the things is that we actually just crossed the threshold of being one of, if not the largest of the vacation providers. People don't understand that. But Royal Caribbean, in terms of market value, is larger than any airline, any hotel company, any tour operator,
Hmm.
and in fact, all the other cruise lines combined. So we make a significant impact, and I'm very proud of what we produce.
Yeah, my wife has never been on a cruise. I used to take cruises all the time with my family when I was younger. So I'm working on getting my wife and our two kids to go on a cruise one of these days. Maybe it'll be on a Royal Caribbean ship, but
Jacob, I hope I can. If not, like, we accomplished nothing else today. I hope I can convince you, because she
I know
really.
yeah, I love it. I remember I actually did a few cruises on Royal Caribbean. This was many years ago, probably, I don't know, 25 years ago. I used to go with my mom and my dad and my brother. So yeah, I'm convincing my wife. We're gonna try to plan a family cruise, and we'll try to make it a Royal Caribbean one.
Well, and I can tell you that our guest satisfaction is just over the top. People come back loving it. In fact, when people come back from a cruise, when people come back from any vacation, they said, "Oh, I had a great time. It was wonderful. We did this, that, the other thing." But when people come back from one of our cruises, they're obnoxious about it. I mean, they aren't just raving about it. They are, "Oh my God, how could you not cruise?" And so, if nothing else, maybe I can sell a cruise today.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember the sheer size and scale of the ships is absolutely massive. And I think it was last year, right? You introduced the Icon of the Seas, which this massive ship. Can you give people just a little bit of context around how big these things are? Because we always think of the Titanic as being a giant ship, but how many people are on a ship like the Icon of the Seas? How much do these things cost to build? How long does it take to build? What is the scale required to make something like this?
Well, first of all, I always have to start by saying that the important thing is that our guests have a wonderful time. But we do have a little over 7,000 guests on the larger ship like that. We have 2,500 or so crew. So the ship will carry up to 10,000 people.
Wow.
It's roughly the size of two aircraft carriers. And it is a floating city. We have all kinds of activities. Part of what we did at Royal Caribbean was we said people wanted not just to compete with other cruise lines, but we wanted to compete with other vacation alternatives. So we wanted to give people alternatives. You can have dinner in 26 different ways. You can have shows in several theaters. You can go to ice skating on board. um,
Wow.
uh, aqua theater, um, all kinds of flow simulator, surfing simulator. So it's the plethora of things to do that has made us so successful. But of course, I also have to say, so maybe I'm appealing to your wife, we have the very largest ships, but we run the gamut. And if you want a smaller one, we have ships as small as 100 guests.
Hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how it has evolved since your time, when you first started in 1979? Because I mean, I do remember loving going on cruises when I was much younger. Yeah, I know I haven't been on a cruise in a little while. Have you seen a massive evolution in terms of just technology, scale, what these cruise ships even look like? Has the industry changed a lot over the past 30, 40 years?
Well, I was fortunate when I joined Royal Caribbean. It had started. Ed Steffen was the founder, and he started it with a vision of innovation that we would do new and different kinds of cruising. And so our ships in those days were the first incarnation of ships that weren't designed for transatlantic travel. These were the early ships that were designed to go after Caribbean cruising and in the sun and pure cruising activity. And we built on that. And we said, wait a minute, when we talked to our guests, when we talked more importantly to people who weren't our guests and asked what they wanted more choice, more things to do, more activities. And so we expanded it and started offering shows that compete with Broadway, food that competes with the best you'll find in any major city.
Hmm.
And we tried to, and we expanded in that direction. So the ships have gone from a 12,000-ton vessel, which is what it was when I started our standard size ship. And now, well, you mentioned Icon of the Seas at 258,000 tons. So the
Wow.
ships have gotten enormous, but we've gotten better and continued the early focus on the people. The people who deliver that wow. The ships are spectacular, but Jacob, I don't want to leave this comment without saying it's really the people that make it work. It's really the people that people love.
Hmm. And obviously, you have this new book that's really all about culture. So let's talk a little bit about culture. And before we dive into some of the specific stories and examples that you have from the book, how do you define culture? Because I find that every time I talk to somebody on this podcast, they have a slightly different definition of what culture actually is. So if I've never heard of the phrase or the concept, how would you explain what culture is?
Culture is really a mindset. You want people who are all geared to moving together, to understanding. First, they're going to figure out where we should be going and what's our long term goal, and defining that long term goal, what we call our North Star, and then are insatiable about what it takes to make that happen. These are people who really care and who focus on with the mantra of continuous improvement. But defining it is a little difficult. But it's the mindset that that we share as a common set of values.
Hmm. Common set of shared values. I like that. Okay, I can get behind that. That's simple and straightforward.
And I would probably add in there if I were trying to define it purpose. The shared values lead you to what are we here for? What are we trying to accomplish? And the shared value and a shared view of that is the culture.
So does that mean that, for example, during the hiring process, or even maybe after employees work there, it's a constant evaluation, right? I mean, if you're talking to somebody and let's say they're very qualified, maybe you're looking to hire somebody on in a technical role, and they're a superstar, they're great at whatever it is you're looking for, but maybe their values are a little bit off. Or maybe the purpose that they have for themselves is not necessarily aligned with the purpose of the business, right? There's just a little bit of a gap where they're good at what they do, but you're not quite sure they're for you. Would you still hire them?
It's interesting you say that, and I love the way you articulated that, Jacob, because that is key to what we think makes success. A skill set, an ability to do whatever it is you do, whether you're an accountant or you're a a lawyer or you're a technical person or you're a computer, you don't get very far in the door without having the basic skill set to do what you're being hired to do. And you don't stay very long if you don't have that skill set. But the thing that's going to make you successful is your ability to work with others towards a common goal. And so, in our hiring process and in our reviewing process, the concept of collaboration, the concept of working together, the concept of sharing that culture is an important part of it. I like to use the term, we're often looking not for fitness, but for fit.
Mm,
And I would say more often when somebody either isn't happy with us or we're not happy with them, it's not because they can't do the specifics of the job. It's not because they don't understand the technicalities of the job. It's because they don't work well in our environment and they don't subscribe to our culture. And
okay.
that it isn't necessarily fault. It's not a question of blame. It's a question of different people have different orientations. But we have a certain culture, and working on that culture makes us successful.
Okay. So it sounds like then, even if somebody's really qualified and they're good at their job, if they're not aligned with the culture or their purpose, there's probably not a good fit for them.
Because if you're not aligned, you don't accomplish the goal.
Yeah.
Accomplishing the goal requires a bit of fanaticism. It requires a passion. And if you're not aligned towards getting towards that goal, moving towards that North Star, then you're going to work at cross purposes to do that. Not intentionally, it's just an inevitability. And so we find that more often fit is the issue rather than fitness or competence.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. What about for somebody that you hire? They've been at the company maybe for a little while, and then the separation starts. So maybe over time their values change, over time their purpose changes, and they start to drift away. Again, they're still good at what they do, but they start to drift away from being a fit for the company.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to say that most often people really do adopt. They start, as some of our people say, they start to bleed Royal Caribbean blue, who is our color, um, and so over time we've been extraordinarily lucky, successful, pleased to have people that really do fit the culture and really do work to move us forward. But occasionally, absolutely, we have situations where that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And my experience is that it's better to acknowledge that and to move on. And it's better for both the employee and for the employer. And so it's better to be open about that. I think one of the important elements of our culture is candor, honesty, openness. And so you pretty much know if you're not liking your boss or your boss isn't liking you. And it usually, unfortunately, is a question of personality.
Yeah.
And we should face up to that and move on.
It also makes me wonder if that means you can create too much. Who was I talking about this with? It was the CHRO of Booking Holdings. And we were talking about this idea of, can you have too much belonging, too much inclusivity, where you try to be everything to anybody. And so you hire anybody inside your company without paying attention to if they are aligned with the culture, if they are aligned with the purpose. And I think so many organizations, especially during and post pandemic, were so desperate to attract and retain talent that they were just kind of like, anybody can come in. We don't care if you're a culture fit. As long as you can do the job, you can be here. But it seems like now more than ever, companies do need to be more selective. And it's okay to say, we're not inclusive for once you get here, yes, we want everybody to feel once they have a job here that they can, show up and do their work. But before you get in, we're not a company for everybody. We're a company for a very specific set of people who believe in these things, who have these values, who share in our purpose. And if that's you, then you should work here.
Well, we're very fortunate because we've been able to attract. Um, One of the other corollaries here is you need to make sure that you are an attractive employer. You
Yes.
really want to make sure that people want to work for you. So it's not just a question that we want people that, quote, fit our culture, but we want to be a sufficiently attractive employer that people really want to work for us. So we can choose those who are both best qualified and a cultural fit.
Hmm.
And we've been very fortunate in doing that. And we put a lot of effort into that. And frankly, you were part of that process. We early on identify some key leaders. We give them special compensation. We put them on a special track. They go through special training. Um, and we try and give them projects that will help them work with other areas in the company because we also believe in cross fertilization across specializations. So we've been fortunate, and it, we try to, and we've been lucky enough to be able to attract enough people that we don't have to um, settle for whatever's available. And in fact, one of the statistics I was fascinated in is in businesses across America, on average, only 25% of jobs are filled from within. Three
Oh, wow.
quarters, statistically, three quarters of jobs are not filled by promoting from within, but by going outside.
Hmm.
And going outside is always some risk associated with it. You never really know. And also, people from within want to know that that opportunity is there. So we're fortunate that statistically our numbers are closer to 40% get promoted from within on shore, and on the ships, which is where we have the people that are in day-to-day contact with our guests, 80% of all jobs are filled by promoting from within. That's
Hmm.
also an important part of the culture. Also makes you want to stay with us and be happy there.
Talk to me a little bit about what you just said. As far as leaders, you said that they get access to different areas of the business. And so I love that approach because I think a lot of people, right, to be a good leader in any company, you can't just understand what's going on in front of you. You have to be able to understand different parts of the business. So what does that look like? I mean, if I'm in marketing and I'm a high potential person in marketing, or you identified that I can be on a leadership track, do you give me access to work in operations, to work on a cruise ship, to work in, I don't know, operate, or I already said operations, customer experience, for example? What does that program actually look like? Because I think more companies need to be doing that.
Well, I don't know that it works for every company, but I'm sure it works for ours. And I think it comes from my own personal experience. I was lucky enough to have leaders who groomed me for doing different things. And so I spent time in different areas. We do it two ways. We do it by some specific training. And again, you were part of that. But the bigger way we do it is by moving people around from department to department. And probably the best way I can point that out is by looking at our leadership today. So Jason Liberty, who is our CEO today, started as head of auditing. He oversee at various times purchasing and IT, and he also took responsibility for the Silver Sea brand. So he had operation experience. Michael Bailey, who runs the Royal Caribbean brand, started as a purser on a ship, and he
Huh.
went from the ship to human resources on land. And then we asked him to do a stint in the marketing department. Laura Hodges actually started as who runs the celebrity brand, actually started as an accessibility expert, and then she went into investor relations. And we actually had her do a stint in
Hmm.
China running our operation there. So what we
Wow.
find is that this, first of all, it makes life more interesting.
Yeah.
It's really fun to do all these things, I think. And it gives them exposure so that when they're dealing with a problem, they're not looking at it with blinders on. It sometimes seems like it isn't as much of a promotion because a lot of these moves are lateral moves.
Hmm.
But overall, it moves you up the ladder and I think makes you a better leader.
But it's not for everybody, right? Because I would imagine that for some people, like what you mentioned, I forgot what the lady's name was. You said, she went to China for a while.
Laura Hodges, yes.
Yeah, Laura. And so obviously doing that. So the point that I'm trying to get at is leadership is a very difficult and challenging role that requires a lot of sacrifices, and it's not for everybody. Like there are not a lot of people who would say, you know what, I'm interested in maybe one day becoming a top executive at this company. I'll move to China, or yeah, I'll work 70 to 80 hours a week, or yeah, I'll do 3 a.m. phone calls if I need to and late nights. There are some people out there who think that they can get into these leadership roles by working 32 to 40 hours a week. But it seems like everybody, at least on your leadership team, has had to work hard. They had to make sacrifices. Maybe you missed some important family events. Can you talk a little bit about what is required to get to that top level of leadership in terms of sacrifice, hard work, and why it's not a role that's for everybody?
Well, and that's a question that society is looking at every day, and it's a very important topic. Um, and you're not going to have a very satisfied workforce if everybody is working 24/7.
Yeah.
Uh, and um, yes, I think our top leaders do work hard, but they work methodically. They work thoughtfully. And as you say, it's not for everybody, and we have plenty of people who have been very successful in the company in sticking to a certain area or functioning in a certain way. But this concept that you either have to work hard or have a life is simply wrong. I guess I'm a good example of that. I have 4 wonderful kids and 8 extraordinary grandchildren. What I did need to do is organize myself and be thoughtful about my time. But when I look at the leadership teams that we have today, I think they are outstanding leaders. I think they work very hard. There's no question about that. They're not doing a 40-hour work week, but they pace their time
Yeah.
and they work hard to do it. Jason gets up at 5 in the morning to do his exercises, but
Wow.
that's an important part of his lifestyle, and he just does that. But then he's also an amazing father to 4 wonderful kids. So you can balance the two. I think part of it is you have to be intentional about that, just as you have to be intentional about your decision making and your goals and the way you operate at work.
Yeah. But you would agree that a lot of these people are working more than 40 hours a week. They're probably doing 50, 60 hours. Jason, I love that he's waking up at 5 in the morning, and that's exactly it. Not everyone is willing to wake up at 5. And it's a unique thing where somebody like Jason needs to have that mentality of, you know what, I'm one of one in my role. There's no other CFO or COO or CHRO in the company. I'm one of one. And so if I want to be successful in that role and also make time for my family, then you have to do what you have to do, right? I mean, that's the challenge and the privilege of being in that role. That's why executives get paid well. That's why but they also have tremendous responsibility, more than I think a lot of people realize.
Well, I think you've put your finger on something very important. You have to decide what you want and what you're prepared to give. It's
Yeah.
always a choice. If somebody says to me, I really only want to work 30 hours a week and I want to be able to sleep late and spend my time doing it, I think that's terrific. And I don't want to think about business when I go home. I think that's fine. And we have a lot of people like that who are terrifically successful and a real benefit to our company. We're privileged and lucky to have them. On the other hand, they're not saying, and I expect to be treated the same way as if I'm working 50, 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, it's a decision that you get to make, and each person can make it for him or herself. And I think each person is different, and I'm happy to say we have both. I would hate it if all of our people worked. We're getting up at 5 a.m.
Yeah. Not everybody can be Jason.
Not everybody can be Jason, but I'd also hate it if nobody got up at 5 a.m. We
Yeah.
need the balance, and I think what I like about Royal Caribbean is that we give everybody the opportunity to choose how they want to act and fit into one role or another that is consistent with what they want for their own lives.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important distinction that you made is choice. Choice, and also making sure that the expectations that you have align with the input. So if somebody's working 30 or even 40 hours a week and they say, yeah, I want to be the COO or CHRO, probably not going to happen. You could still be successful with the company. Maybe you'll be a senior manager, maybe you'll be a director, but to get to that top level, you need to be willing to make those sacrifices, to go live in another country, to work 60 hours a week, and to decide, to your point, that's a trade-off, right? I'm trading off putting in more, working harder, working smarter, doing things that most other people wouldn't do for that leadership role. But you don't have to, right? To your point, you don't have to. You can be, and I think that's part of the challenge is people should just be honest with what expectations they have and make sure those expectations align with what they're willing to put in and what sacrifices they're willing to make, if any.
Um, I think the beauty is that one of the things that's important in Royal Caribbean in our culture is the passion.
Yeah.
We have a purpose. We want to be excellent at in everything we do. And in order to be excellent, you really have to make some kind of a commitment. It doesn't have to be more hours in the week, but what you do has to be excellent. And by the way, some people are more efficient than others.
Yeah.
That's all part of the process. And I think it's important for us to find the right roles for everybody within the company so that they are fitting in within their own objectives for themselves and for the company. But I think part of what has made us successful is the passion of excellence, the determination to do better.
Hmm.
That you don't have to work endless hours to do better. You just need to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I am going to make sure that it is done to the best of my ability.
In your book, you talk about these angry letters that you received, which I thought was a great story. And so, can you share a little bit about that? Like, people actually wrote you letters and said, "Oh, Richard, you're an idiot. You're terrible. Your company sucks. We hate you." Can you share a little bit about the angry letters you were getting, and what did you do with them? How did you how did you take that feedback?
Well, Jacob, I thought on these things I'm only supposed to talk about good things, but it's
Yes.
with all the guests that we carry, it's true that not everybody is thrilled with their cruise, and but I really thought that there was an ironic twist to so many of the letters that I get, which, as you say, dear Mr. Fain, you're an idiot. You're useless. Everybody around you, the company is terrible because they had a bad cruise. And I think it really speaks to who our people are. They say, but remember, my cabin steward, Mary, was unbelievable. And George in the dining room was fantastic. And you'd be shocked how often a letter where people have so much anger and then they say, but Mary was unbelievable. And that tells me that, first of all, we have to do something about whatever it was that caused the anger. That's fair. But it really highlights to me just how amazing our people are. They live and breathe the culture. They are passionate about what we say is delivering the wow. And you see it in even the angry letters I.
It's actually interesting that people would be angry at you, but they then say they recognize somebody on your, on the staff, on the team that did an amazing job. That's a very interesting kind of balance. You're an idiot. I hate you, but Mary did a great job.
Well, and it does show the importance of the people because it's the
Yeah.
people, it's the people, it's the people. They're the crews. The ships are fantastic, and don't misunderstand. I think the ships are amazing. I'm proud of the architecture. I'm proud of the design. I'm proud of the art. But the thing that makes it come to life is the people, and they are extraordinary. And it's the culture that drives that because we don't you don't enforce that by discipline. It's the culture that they each feed on each other. Each are trying to move us all up. And If everybody on board is working towards providing the best vacation possible, then it works well. If
Yeah.
one or two aren't pulling in the same way, everybody knows it.
How do you create that though? Because to your point, it's not discipline or mandated, but it could be something so simple. Like I remember my wife and I recently we took our kids to Puerto Vallarta. This was a few weeks ago, and we got to one hotel there, and the hotel there that we checked in, and it had great reviews online. A lot of people loved it on TripAdvisor. And we get to the hotel, and immediately my wife is like, "Oh no, we're getting the hell out of here." I'm like, "Why? What's wrong?" And so, online there's these big, nice, beautiful pictures. Everything looks fantastic. You show up there, it's a different experience. People aren't really greeting you. In other words, people could care less if you're there or you're not. And so, we're scrambling. My wife is very upset because we wanted to take our kids on, my son is 5 years old. So this was kind of like his first big vacation. Uh,
When you take your cruise vacation, we're going to own him, and then we'll own you.
yeah. So we get there. It's like tiny, tiny beds, which they didn't say they were there. The staff wasn't friendly. Everything was closed. We went to go get food. They ran out of food, and it was just a terrible experience from top to bottom. And so we quickly rebook somewhere else. We drive an hour, and we get to this other hotel. And as soon as we get there, we're greeted with smiles. And when we get out of the car, they say, "Welcome home. This is going to be your home for the next 5 days." And it's totally different. Now, obviously, one resort was more, the second one was more like a luxury resort versus the first one. But as far as like how people greet you, smile, um, those little things, the comparison between those two hotels was night and day. And obviously, at the second hotel, I don't know what they do differently. It was a Barrish property, and the first one was, I think, a Hilton property, if I'm not mistaken. The jobs of both those people or the staff at both hotels is the same. So I'm always wondering, what is it that the second hotel did to tell those employees? Because to your point, they don't discipline. They're not smile or you're fired. What are they? What do you do? What do these types of brands do that other brands don't? Because it's such a small difference. Smile, welcoming, how are you? But it makes a huge impact. So if you don't discipline it, you don't force it. How do you get people to genuinely care?
So that is, I think, I actually wrote a book, so you could, which you have read, thankfully, on precisely that question, and that is the key question for any organization. And there's a whole series of it, a whole series of principles that apply there. But I would say a few are. The first is everybody needs to understand what you're trying to accomplish. Alignment is key, and people need to understand that if we're going to be successful as a company, and if we're successful as a company, you as an employee will be better off. The company grows, etc. Um, and in order to do that, we say deliver the wow. That's sort of our mantra. It's above and beyond. It's that extra smile. It's the crew member who, when they're asking a child at dinner what they want to eat, bends down and gets on one knee so that they're at the eye level with the child. Um,
Mm.
it's as you say, it's smiling when you see them, and not just when you're called upon, but when you walk down the corridor. If you're a engineer working on the air conditioning in the corridor and somebody walks by, isn't it unusual in your experience that that person would stop what they're doing and look at you and look you in the eye and say, "Good morning, isn't it a lovely day?"
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I feel better. And everybody understands that. And we have a culture that understands we work together. And part of it is because we measure it. We are
Mm.
maniacal about measuring it. And we measure it in any different number of ways. But probably the most impactful is that we survey our guests. We do it in a way that encourages them to participate, so we get a very high participation rate, and we get that answer. And when there's an issue, we are all on it, so that everybody understands that this is important. But the truth is, simply measuring it, whether or not you actually do anything specific with the measurement itself is impactful. But the key is, number one, understanding this is what we have to do. We have to be intentional about this. Delivering the wow is what we stand for and what every person who works in the company has to be behind.
Mm,
The culture supports that.
yeah. You mentioned measuring it. What are some metrics that you pay attention to when it comes to culture that maybe other companies out there can be paying attention to as well? And then maybe you can dive a little bit deeper in, as the CEO, when you were there, did you have a dashboard? Was this something that you looked at every week, every month? Like how were you looking and measuring and tracking culture?
It's really very important that everybody understands what those goals are. And
Okay.
so I would argue, yes, we have a dashboard. We look at it. We look at it actually at the end of every cruise. We
Oh, for
get
the specific cruise. Okay. So not
for
like,
every specific cruise.
okay.
Now, we have thousands of cruises, so one can't look at it in detail, but everybody shares the data. A key thing here is this isn't a dashboard that I look at. This is a dashboard that people throughout the company look at. So
Mm,
I mentioned that we survey our guests. If one of the questions on the survey was how was your cabin, and people interpret that really was how was your cabin steward, that cabin steward will get the responses from every family that was in one of the cabins that he or she oversaw.
okay.
And that cabin steward will know that his or her boss will also get it for all of the cabin stewards in that boss's area of responsibility. And that will go up to the chief steward, and that will go up to the hotel director, and that will go up to the captain, and it keeps going up, and you add more and more of these. Everybody knows that everybody's looking at them. That's really important.
Mm,
I really got a sense of how people react when they're sharing, when they're looking at the same thing you are. Many years ago, I'll take just a moment and tell this story.
no,
Many
please,
years
please.
ago, Many years ago, we were putting in a new computer system to operate the phones, and it was simply allocating the calls. And the idea was it would give us more ability to track how you, as a reservationist, or how quickly you were handling calls, how long they were, et cetera, how much people were waiting. And before we got into that, this computer system came with one of those running scripts across the wall. And it
Okay.
simply said, how many people are on hold and how long have they been waiting? And one of the things was interesting, and we then would have computer metrics that would allow us to manage our people better to improve that number. It turns out, it was really shocking. The big improvement came simply by giving everybody in the call center the information of how many people were waiting. They improved it on their own. We didn't have to do anything, simply giving them the information and making it clear what our goal was. So we set ourselves a goal at the time of answering 80% of every call within 20 seconds.
Mm.
Very clear. And if that went over 20 seconds, the light went yellow. And if it went over 40 seconds, the light went red. And then it actually gave the number of seconds people were holding. So just sharing the information and being open about what we were trying to accomplish was amazingly successful.
I love that story because I think when most people think of culture, they think of doing an engagement survey, doing a pulse survey where employees, kind of respond on, and we'll touch on that in a minute too. But in this case, it sounds like the way that you were able to create that great culture is you give people access to the data and then information, and they know that their manager, their leader is looking at the data too. And so this is the same case whether you worked in the restaurants, whether you worked and were running the cabin. You saw how people reviewed you, and your boss did, your boss's boss, and everybody knew that everybody else was looking at this. And then I'm assuming if you got good reviews, you would get some sort of an incentive. If you didn't get good reviews, you might have a talk with your boss and see what you can do to improve. Is that kind of a fair statement?
Absolutely. So you sat down once a month with your boss, in talking about the call center, and it would say, here's number of calls you handled, here's how long you took in the individual calls. But there were really two things that were key metrics that you discussed with your boss every month, which was number one, how many of your calls converted to a booking?
Okay.
And number two, you and your boss independently listened to half a dozen randomly recorded calls, and
Hmm.
you each rated them on how you did. Did you repeat the name of the person you were talking to at least three times? Was your voice friendly? It's quite subjective measures. Did you offer alternatives? Was your answers prompt? Um, and again, coming back to friendliness, it turns out to be one of the key metrics from our point of view. And you and your boss individually ranked these calls, and then you compared your rankings. And you tried to agree on what the ranking should be. And if you didn't, it would go to, we had a group of quality people who would, in effect, try and arbitrate that. The
Hmm.
surprising thing was, number one, it turns out independently, our reservationists and their supervisors tended to rank them pretty much the same. There really wasn't a lot of conflict there.
Okay.
And so that was surprisingly effective. And it wasn't the boss looking over your shoulder. It wasn't a discipline thing. It was um, an encouragement. Hey, we're all trying to accomplish the same goal. Now, we also gave out bonuses based on your performance. And of course, that was very welcome. But it was really a shared goal. And it was that sharing of the ultimate goal that I think was so successful in raising our standards.
How did you also measure culture in terms of like engagement surveys as well, where it's employees giving feedback to the company as opposed to customers giving feedback to the employees?
Yes. So we're very focused on our net promoter score, but the bonus of every senior executive in the company, from the CEO on down, depends on not just the financial metrics, which is sort of where we started. Most bonus programs are your net income, your return on investment, et cetera.
Yeah.
But we put in subjective, admittedly subjective, measurements of other forms of quality. One was safety, one was environmental protection, one was guest satisfaction. But a
Hmm.
key metric that everybody got measured on was employee net promoter score. In other words, how the employees felt about the employer, what was their engagement. And if engagement went up, and every year, by the way, as part of our mantra of continuous improvement, every year we raised the bar. And your bonus, whoever you were, was based on that metric. And when we started that, people said, what does this have to do with me? You're giving me a safety metric. I'm an accountant. And if somebody trips on the ship, my bonus is impacted. That doesn't seem right. Or if somebody in the hotel operations department is not enjoying his job or not engaged in the work, my bonus suffers. And we
Hmm.
said, yes, we're all in this together. And that common momentum, that common passion, that common demand for excellence really turned out to be very successful. And so people really focused on those.
Hmm. I want to touch on some of the other stories from the book. And if I get anything incorrect, let me know. One of them was you had some crazy ideas during your time there. Some of them panned out, some of them didn't. So I was curious to get your thoughts on the ideas and how you balance when people tell you no with thinking something is correct. And one of them was, I think I read the Innovation Lab, kind of a cave that you built where people could, or employees could kind of walk through and visualize the ship in augmented or virtual reality. And from what I remember, your finance team was telling you, no, Richard, this is not a good idea. Don't do it. It's a waste of money. You're crazy. And you overrode them and you said, no, we have to do this. So talk to me a little bit about A, why you did that, and B, how do you know? Was it purely gut instinct at that point? Like, how do you know sometimes? Because just to disagree with your finance team and with other leaders is challenging. And sometimes as the CEO or as a leader of a team or function, even if people disagree with you, you have to sometimes say, no, this is what we're doing. Like, that's it. So talk to me a little bit about that story and what you did there.
Well, I remember well. First of all, Jacob, I don't. You've obviously read the book. I'm quite well, actually. Surprisingly, I'm impressed. But I do have to emphasize, most of these aren't my ideas. In fact, I think what made us successful was not a series of epiphanies, or not a series of just breakthrough concepts. I think it was that we looked at things and we studied them and we were never satisfied with them and we continuously improved them. But this one happened to have been something I was personally involved in. We do have this process we call a CAR, a capital appropriation request. And every capital project we do goes through this process. And we have a committee that reviews all the requests. And we did have this idea that we would build this innovation lab that would have in it this virtual reality simulator, which would allow us to design ships and visualize them better. And it was transformational. It was a new technology. People worried about it being a cutting edge or bleeding edge kind of technology because it was extraordinarily new at the time. But remember, we were investing billions of dollars in new ships. And so if we had a tool that could potentially improve those ships and it cost a few tens of millions of dollars, how can you argue against trying it? And if it doesn't work, you fail and you move on. In this particular case, I was the sponsor on the capital request, and the committee didn't see it. And they were looking at purely the numbers, and they say, we don't actually see a payback. I thought I was thrilled that they said that because that means they really cared. That's part of the culture. The important lesson I got out of that was not that I was right. Of course, I would now tell them I was. But the important lesson wasn't that I was right. The important lesson was they cared enough to say, Richard, you're wrong. Now, in this case, I had the ability. Jason and I, he was our chief financial officer. He agreed with me, and the two of us said, we're going to do this. But I think the real lesson of that was that we didn't have sycophants in the roles. We had people who cared enough to say, Richard, we don't agree. We know you're going to overrule us. She said that, the chair of the committee said that to me right away. She said, I know you're going to overrule this, but we have to tell you what we think, and then you can decide. And by the way, once you decide, we will have alignment and everybody will move in the right direction. And that's a key too, that we all have to feel passion, but we don't have to feel so much passion that we're not willing to compromise. And in this case, we did it. Thank you for choosing one of the examples where I have turned out to be right, not one of the examples where I turned out to be so terribly wrong.
That was going to be the next question, but I
Oh,
love.
I never should have said anything.
But I like that this sort of idea of like disagree but commit, or disagree but still move in that direction. So that's an important thing because sometimes people try to lead too much from consensus, and I don't think that's always a good approach. I think it's better. I mean, that's part of the role of a CEO or a team leader, right? Sometimes you get the information and people say, look, We don't think that you should do this, but it's your call. And if you decide to make that call and move in that direction, we'll support you, we'll align with it, but we don't think it's the right, direction.
I
Uh,
think I've seen too often, sorry, too often people say, well, we need to reach a consensus on this.
yeah.
And so we'll satisfy George by compromising on this and not doing quite this. So we'll build the innovation lab, but we'll do it a little bit on the cheap. Instead of 12 computers running it, we think we can get by with 8, etc. So the idea that we reach a decision and then we move forward and everybody is pulling in the same direction, that's a key part of the culture.
Yeah. Okay, now bad story, or maybe one idea that didn't work. So I was reading it was about a blimp, right? So you had this idea of, was it like towing a blimp behind a cruise ship so that people could go in the blimp during the cruise and they could be like 500 feet in the air and kind of see the ocean. Talk a little bit about that, and why did that fail, and how how big of a failure was it?
It was a brilliant idea, by the way, but it wasn't my idea, but I loved it. And so the idea was you make this large blimp and you dangle below it a gondola that holds 16 or 18 people. And it goes up hundreds of feet into the air and is towed behind the ship. And it seemed like a terrific idea. Remember, the ship we were building was Oasis of the Seas. It was a revolutionary new ship. Nobody had ever conceived of a ship of this scale with these many activities, this much going on. And so they designed the blimp that could be towed behind the ship. It had to meet all kinds of safety requirements you can just begin to imagine. So they tested it in a computer simulation. Then they built a small model. Then they built a full-scale model and tried it in the factory. Then they did it out in a meadow. Then they towed it behind a truck on an airport runway. And then the supreme test was to take it on board the ship during the sea trials and tow it behind the ship and let it be exposed to the element. And I like to try out everything, all these new gadgets that we're doing. I like to see how I like them. So I did the Flow Rider and the iFly and the North Star and all these things. And so I wanted to try this, and I flew to Sweden. The ship was doing the sea trials off the coast of Sweden because we would run into bad weather there, which we wanted to try out the ship during the sea trials. They brought the balloon, the blimp, and the gondola. I went up in it. I didn't go all the way. I'm afraid of heights, so I only went, I think, 300 or 400 feet into the air, and then said that was enough. But the view was spectacular. We could see the coastline of Sweden. We could see the ship. It was an amazing experience. So, absolutely thought that was fantastic. We went to bed that night. We had a storm during the night, and it was just a test, so we didn't have a cradle to hold the blimp. And the storm was so hard, it broke the blimp's tether, and the blimp flew off. And in the morning, the captain got a phone call from, this is the Swedish Air Force, and your blimp is in our aircraft pathways. We would like to shoot it down. I guess he seemed to be asking for permission, as I understood it. I'm not sure why the Swedish Air Force needs our permission. But in any event, the captain said, well, of course, we don't want to interfere with aircraft. But fortunately, it was descending on its own, and it ended up in the sea. So we said the Oasis of the Seas is such an amazing ship, it doesn't need this, and probably wasn't meant to be. So it was a very expensive test. Still think it was a great idea, but no, it was a failure, and we killed it.
But it seems
Although
like
we,
it
we
only.
are using it, I should tell you, we are doing blimps on our private destinations, and they're very,
Ah,
but they're stationary, so it's a lot easier.
but it seems like this one only failed. Like you said, it was a test and there was a big storm, and it wasn't tethered. So is it really a failure then? Because what if it was tethered and it wasn't a big storm? Then it could be fine.
we'll see if Royal Caribbean looks at that in the future. Yes, if it had been properly tethered, it wouldn't have flown off, and we might well even have done it. I don't know. You know, part of what makes us successful is we try lots of things and we get to select amongst a lot of good alternatives.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a failure or a success. There are all levels of success.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody heard it here first. If in the future you see a Royal Caribbean blimp, you're going to know where it came from. And we'll play back this podcast and clip it. Richard, I feel like we could talk for so much, another hour or so, because we didn't even get into some of the other cool stories that you have. But, we're out of time. Been almost an hour. Where can people go to learn more about you, your book, if they want to hear about some of these other stories? Are you active on social media by any chance?
Actually, I don't know. We do have a website for the book, and I should be able to quote it to you directly. I can't, but if you Google Richard Fain and delivering the wow,
Or just Richard Fain Amazon, it also pops up as the first result too.
okay. And the other thing you could do, I mean, of course, your listeners could buy the book, but you and your wife and your listeners could also buy a cruise. I can assure you, based on all the other millions of people that we carry every year, they will have a great time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. If we ever end up going, I'll let you know, and I'll share the experience. I'm sure it'll be an amazing experience. Richard, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, sharing some of your insights and stories. I really appreciate it.
Jacob, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and you made this easy and enjoyable for me.
Nice and painless. That's how we like to do it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.